The morning sun rose slowly over the sprawling complex of Aerolux Industries, one of the world's most prestigious private jet manufacturers. Inside its glass and steel headquarters, men in suits carried briefcases, women in heels clicked across marble floors, and the soft hum of innovation filled the air. But among those walking these corridors was one man who didn't belong, or at least, that's what everyone thought. Before we begin, tell us in which country you are watching this beautiful story, and if you love your beautiful country, then like, share, and then hit the subscribe button. His name was Ethan Cole. A quiet, middle-aged janitor with tired eyes and worn shoes, he moved through the building like a shadow. Every morning, before the employees arrived, he would sweep the hangar floors where multi-million-dollar jets gleamed under bright industrial lights. His hands smelled of polish and cleaning solvents, yet his touch was gentle, precise, almost reverent, as if he cared for these machines far more than anyone else. To most people, Ethan was invisible. Just another janitor collecting a modest paycheck. But there was a calmness about him, an air of quiet dignity that made a few people look twice. No one knew where he came from, and he never spoke about his past. The only clue was a small tattoo on his wrist, a design of intertwined wings and fire, partially hidden beneath his sleeve. But in Aerolux Industries, no one noticed tattoos. They noticed power. And at the top of that pyramid stood Alexander Grant, the company's billionaire CEO. Alexander was young, brilliant, and ruthless. He had built his empire from the ashes of competition, and his word was law. He was known for his sharp eyes that missed nothing and his sharper tongue that spared no one. For him, success was everything, and those who couldn't keep up were left behind. That morning, the CEO's arrival was as dramatic as always. His black limousine pulled up at the private hangar, bodyguards stepped out first, and then came Alexander, tall, impeccably dressed, radiating authority. His employees froze, whispering among themselves. Ethan simply stepped aside, mop in hand, as the powerful man passed. But fate has strange ways of crossing paths that were never meant to meet. As Ethan cleaned the glass near the executive corridor, a sudden commotion broke out. A small group of workers had spilled coffee on the CEO's newly delivered prototype presentation, the blueprint of Aerolux's upcoming $300 million jet design. The air turned tense. Alexander's voice, cold and controlled, sliced through the silence. And that's when his eyes landed on Ethan. The janitor stood nearby, holding a mop, observing the chaos quietly. It was a simple look, but for Alexander, it was enough to ignite irritation. To him, Ethan's calm gaze felt almost disrespectful, almost judgmental. He turned toward him sharply, his voice echoing through the corridor. He berated the janitor for standing around, for being useless, for not understanding the value of what this company represented. His words were like blades, designed to cut deep. Laughter rippled softly through the employees gathered nearby. Ethan lowered his eyes, nodded silently, and went back to his work without a word. But in that brief moment, something in his expression shifted, not anger, not shame, but something deeper. A flicker of memory. That night, long after the lights in the building went dark, Ethan stayed behind. He often did. The silence of the hangar comforted him, the sound of wind whispering through steel, the faint creak of cooling engines. He walked past rows of unfinished jets, their metallic bodies reflecting the moonlight. He stopped before one, the Valkyrie X9, Aerolux's most secretive project. Only a handful of engineers even knew how it worked. But Ethan looked at it with familiarity, almost affection. He ran his hand along its curved body, tracing the rivets with precision. Every line, every joint, every hidden panel, he seemed to know them all. In that silence, his mind wandered back to a life long buried. Once, years ago, he wasn't a janitor. Once, he was an engineer. One of the best in his field. The tattoo on his wrist, the emblem of the Phoenix program, was a mark shared only by a select few who had built the foundation of Aerolux itself. But betrayal had wiped his name from history, forcing him to disappear. And now, by some strange twist of fate, he found himself working in the empire he had unknowingly helped create. As he stood in the hangar, lost in thought, he heard footsteps behind him. Someone had entered, a young woman, one of the interns, startled to see him there so late. She apologized and left quickly, but her curious gaze lingered. The next morning, whispers began to spread. Why was the janitor near the Valkyrie prototype last night? Does he even have clearance to be there? Maybe he's a spy. By noon, The rumors had reached the CEO. Alexander summoned security, his expression unreadable. And that's when it happened. Ethan was mopping near the hangar entrance when 2 guards approached him. They accused him of trespassing in restricted zones. He remained calm, but as they reached to grab his arm, his sleeve slid up, revealing the tattoo. The winged phoenix, surrounded by the symbol of Aerolux's first-generation engineers. The guards froze. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. The tattoo wasn't just a mark, it was an identity, one that no ordinary janitor could possess. And as the CEO stepped forward, confusion flickering across his sharp face, Ethan quietly pulled his sleeve down again and whispered softly, almost to himself, "Some things never really disappear." And with that, he turned away, leaving behind a silence so heavy that even the billionaire didn't know how to break it. That night, Alexander Grant couldn't sleep. He kept seeing the tattoo, the symbol he had only read about in old archives. The Phoenix program, the secret foundation of Aerolux, erased from all public records after a mysterious accident 20 years ago. Who was this man? How did he end up cleaning floors in his company? And why did his presence suddenly feel like the beginning of something far bigger than a misunderstanding? The answers, hidden in the ashes of history, were about to rise again, just like the Phoenix itself. The morning after the incident, the atmosphere at Aerolux Industries felt heavier than usual. The polished corridors that once echoed with ambition now carried whispers. Employees spoke in hushed tones, glancing nervously toward the janitor who had, without saying a word, unsettled the most powerful man in the company. Ethan Cole moved silently as always, mop in hand, expression unreadable. But inside, he felt the weight of his past pressing closer than ever. He had spent years building a new life, hiding behind a simple uniform, raising his daughter quietly without anyone knowing who he once was. And now, one careless slip of a sleeve had threatened to destroy it all. In his office, Alexander Grant sat behind a massive glass desk, staring at an old company file pulled from the archives. The file was yellowed, sealed with the faded emblem of Aerolux's original founding team, the Phoenix program. The same emblem he had seen tattooed on Ethan's wrist. The deeper he looked, the more unsettling it became. The Phoenix program wasn't just the start of Aerolux. It was the soul of it. 20 years ago, a small group of brilliant engineers had built revolutionary aviation designs, aircraft so advanced they changed the face of private aviation. But the project ended abruptly after a catastrophic explosion at the original testing facility. Several members were reported dead. Others vanished without a trace. And one of the names listed among the deceased was Ethan Cole. Alexander leaned back in his chair, disbelief etched across his face. The janitor he had humiliated was supposed to be dead. Yet here he was, alive and working quietly under his nose. For the first time in years, the confident CEO felt unsure of his footing. Who was this man really? Why had he returned? Was he seeking revenge, or redemption? Meanwhile, down in the hangar, Ethan continued his work, trying to ignore the stares. But his thoughts were elsewhere. His mind wandered to a small apartment across the city, home to his 12-year-old daughter, Lila. She was the only reason he endured everything. The only light left in his fractured world. Every evening, after leaving the factory, he'd walk home to her laughter, her questions, her drawings of airplanes on scraps of paper. She dreamed of becoming an aerospace engineer, just like the father she never knew had once been. Ethan would smile quietly when she spoke of designing her own jet someday, never revealing that he had already done it long ago. But destiny had begun to stir again. That afternoon, Alexander summoned the head of security and ordered a full background check on Ethan Cole. Within hours, the results came back, incomplete, fragmented, full of sealed documents and blacked out lines. The man's employment records began only 6 years ago. Before that, nothing. No address, no legal trace, no history. Just a ghost who had walked out of nowhere and taken a janitor's job in one of the world's most secure companies. But the missing pieces weren't the only problem. The security team also discovered something else, a series of late-night access logs. The janitor's ID card had been used multiple times to enter the restricted hangar where the company's newest prototype was stored. When confronted, Ethan said nothing. He simply handed over his keys, his badge, and quietly walked out of the hangar. His silence spoke louder than words. Yet there was something strange about his resignation. He didn't seem defeated. He seemed prepared. That evening, as the city lights shimmered across the horizon, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something. He returned to the hangar alone, long after everyone had left. The Valkyrie X9 prototype stood in the center of the floor, sleek, powerful, perfect. But as he circled it, he noticed a faint inscription carved into one of its panels. It wasn't visible to the naked eye, only when light hit it at the right angle. For words, etched in near invisible precision. For those who rise. Alexander froze. Those were the same words written beneath the emblem of the Phoenix program. Suddenly it all made sense. The Valkyrie design, the aerodynamic curvature, the thrust efficiency, the silent propulsion system, it was all too familiar. These weren't just innovations. They were revivals. Someone had rebuilt the forgotten concepts of the Phoenix era. And that someone was Ethan Cole. The realization hit him like a storm. The janitor wasn't stealing company secrets. He was protecting them from being corrupted, from being commercialized into greed-driven machines. Alexander's entire company stood on foundations laid by a man he had once mocked. But understanding the truth and accepting it were two different things. The next morning, the CEO called an emergency board meeting. The boardroom filled with investors, directors, and senior engineers. At the top of the agenda, unauthorized access by janitorial staff. When Ethan's name appeared on the projector, gasps filled the room. Some demanded immediate legal action. Others, especially the older engineers, grew pale. They recognized the tattoo. They remembered the name. It was then that Alexander realized just how deep the deception of history ran. Aerolux hadn't merely erased the Phoenix program, it had buried it. The truth was that years ago, a corporate takeover had pushed the original engineers aside, and when tragedy struck, those responsible had rewritten history to protect their own image. And the man he had just thrown out was one of the survivors. That night, rain lashed against the windows of the CEO's office as he sat in darkness, haunted by guilt. The image of Ethan's calm eyes refused to leave his mind. He thought of the way the man had touched the aircraft, not like a worker, but like a father seeing his creation once more. Across the city, Ethan sat quietly beside his daughter's bed, watching her sleep. The sound of the storm outside reminded him of that night long ago, the explosion, the betrayal, the fire. He had lost everything, yet fate had led him right back to where it all began. He knew now that running was no longer an option. The truth had to surface. Not for revenge, but for justice, and for the legacy that had been stolen. But before he could act, his phone buzzed with a notification. A message from an unknown number. 3 words that froze his heart. They found you. He looked out the window into the darkness, sensing movement near the street. 2 black cars, parked silently across from his building. Shadows moving inside. The past had finally caught up. The storm outside raged through the night, but inside Ethan Cole's small apartment, it was a different kind of storm, one that lived in silence and fear. The message on his phone still glowed against the dim light of the kitchen. They found you. He had known this day might come. He had just hoped it wouldn't be now. Not when his daughter was still asleep in the next room, dreaming about a world he had tried to keep her safe from. Ethan moved quietly through the apartment, shutting the curtains, turning off the lights, and checking the locks. His heart pounded, not out of panic, but out of grim acceptance. The shadows outside were not random. They were deliberate. Patient. Waiting. He sat down on the edge of the couch, breathing slowly, remembering the last time he had seen those shadows. 20 years ago, back when Aerolux was still just a dream called the Phoenix program, Ethan was one of its youngest and most talented aerospace engineers. He wasn't born into privilege or wealth. He had worked his way up through brilliance and sleepless nights. The Phoenix program was supposed to change the world, a fleet of environmentally advanced private aircraft designed to fly faster, quieter, and farther than anything before. But innovation breeds greed. The program had been backed by several corporate investors, men who saw potential not in science, but in profit. They demanded faster results, cheaper materials, and confidential military partnerships. Ethan had refused. He wanted technology to serve humanity, not destroy it. And that defiance had cost him everything. One night, during the final test of the first Phoenix jet, an explosion ripped through the hangar. Flames devoured everything: the prototypes, the blueprints, and the dreams of every engineer inside. The official report called it an accident. But Ethan knew better. He had seen the sabotage, the tampered systems, the hidden orders. He had escaped the fire, burned and broken, but alive. Others hadn't been so lucky. Among the dead was his wife, Clara, a fellow engineer and the heart of the project. Her loss had shattered him. And so, he disappeared. For 2 decades, Ethan Cole lived in the shadows, raising his daughter under a new name, hiding the truth of who he was. Until fate brought him back, to Aerolux Industries, the reborn version of the very empire built on his stolen designs. And now, that empire was watching him again. Outside his apartment, the 2 black cars remained motionless. Their headlights were off, their windows tinted. Ethan knew they were waiting for him to make a move. But what they didn't know was that Ethan had stopped being afraid a long time ago. He moved to a small cabinet near his desk, pulling out an old metal box. Inside lay the fragments of his past: burned photographs, faded ID badges, a wedding ring, and a single microchip no larger than a fingernail. It contained something more valuable than money, more dangerous than any weapon: the original Phoenix schematics, the real ones, untouched, pure, and impossible to replicate. Those who had stolen his work thought it was gone forever. They were wrong. Ethan slipped the chip into a small drive, encrypting it behind layers of code, and hid it inside his jacket pocket. He didn't know how much longer he had before they came for him, but one thing was certain: his daughter would not pay for his past. At the same time, across the city, Alexander Grant sat alone in his high-rise office, staring out over the storm-drenched skyline. The revelation of Ethan's identity had shaken him. He had spent the entire day reading the classified archives, the ones that no CO was ever supposed to see. What he found inside made his blood run cold. The explosion that ended the Phoenix program wasn't an accident. It had been orchestrated by the very board members who now sat beside him in every meeting, including his own father. The takeover that had made Aerolux the world's leading company had been built on lies, betrayal, and death. Ethan Cole had been the scapegoat. Alexander's chest tightened as he read through the witness reports, the falsified evidence, the doctored photographs. Every document pointed to one truth: the janitor he had insulted wasn't a failure. He was a victim of the company's darkest secret. And now, the same people who once silenced him were moving again. Alexander picked up his phone and called his head of security. "Find him," he said. "Before they do." But by then, the men in the black cars had already made their move. Ethan heard the sound of footsteps outside his door, heavy, synchronized, deliberate. He turned off the last light and quietly opened a drawer, retrieving a small metal rod, not a weapon, but a tool. He didn't believe in violence. He believed in survival. The door handle twisted. The wood cracked. The first man entered, dressed in black, face hidden behind a mask. Ethan moved quickly, hitting the light switch to blind them with sudden brightness. He slipped past the first intruder, grabbed Lila from her room, and guided her silently toward the fire escape. "Dad?" she whispered, half asleep, confused. He didn't answer. He just held her close and climbed down the metal stairs into the rain. Behind him, the apartment door splintered. Voices shouted, orders barked. They were inside. Searching. Breaking. By the time they reached the street, Ethan and his daughter were gone. They disappeared into the storm. Hours later, the only thing the intruders found was the faint smell of jet fuel, and a single piece of paper left on the kitchen table. It was old, folded carefully, with burned edges. Written in precise handwriting were 5 words. "You buried me once. Try again. At dawn, news spread that the janitor had vanished. The board members were furious. Alexander, however, stayed silent. Because deep down, he knew something the others didn't. Ethan wasn't running away. He was preparing for something. The next night, deep within the abandoned remains of the old Phoenix facility, a single light flickered to life for the first time in 2 decades. Dust-covered machines hummed weakly. Blueprints were laid out across the table. And in the center stood Ethan Cole, drenched from the rain, eyes burning with purpose. He placed the microchip onto the console and whispered to the darkness, "Let's finish what we started." Somewhere far away, a sensor inside Aerolux's security grid detected unusual activity in the restricted zone. Alarms flickered silently in the control room. And in his office, Alexander Grant's phone lit up with a single notification. "Unauthorized access detected, Phoenix facility." He froze, realizing where Ethan had gone. The past wasn't just returning, it was about to erupt. The old Phoenix facility had been left to rot for years. Its walls were cracked, its ceiling half collapsed, and the air was thick with dust and forgotten memories. But beneath that decay, the spirit of creation still pulsed, faint, but alive. When Ethan Cole powered up the generators, the facility came to life with a low hum, like the heartbeat of something ancient stirring from its grave. Sparks flickered through the overhead lights, illuminating walls covered in faded blueprints and scorched markings from the explosion that had destroyed everything 2 decades ago. The ghosts of his past whispered through every corridor. Here, he had once walked beside his wife, Clara, as they dreamed of transforming the future of aviation. Here they had built the first prototype, sleek, revolutionary, and pure. And here, he had watched it all turn to fire. Now, as he stood among the ruins, rainwater dripping from his coat, Ethan knew he wasn't just revisiting the past. He was reclaiming it. He moved toward the central workstation, a table covered in sheets of paper and metal fragments he had salvaged years ago. Slowly, he placed the microchip into the old terminal, and the console's screen flickered to life. Lines of encrypted code began to scroll, unlocking blueprints that hadn't been seen since the night of the explosion. The Phoenix jet appeared on the screen. Every design, every measurement, every improvement he and Clara had made, it was all there, untouched by time. He ran his hand across the schematic, feeling his wife's presence in every line. This was her dream. Their dream. And the world had stolen it. Miles away, in the high-rise glow of the Aerolux Tower, Alexander Grant was not sleeping. The alert from the old facility still burned in his mind. He had seen the access logs. It was Ethan. The janitor, the ghost, the man who had changed everything. Against the board's orders, Alexander made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He told no one. He left his office, got into his car, and drove through the night toward the outskirts of the city, where the Phoenix ruins waited. As the CEO's car cut through the storm, memories of his own father clouded his thoughts. His father had been one of the original investors, one of the men who had forced the Phoenix program into military contracts, who had silenced those who resisted. And now, his son was about to face the consequences of those buried sins. Back at the facility, Ethan wasn't alone anymore. His daughter, Lila, sat on a workbench, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes wide with curiosity. She had followed him quietly, refusing to stay behind. Ethan had tried to send her away, but she had looked at him with the same determination her mother once had, and he couldn't say no. So he let her stay. She watched as he worked on something that looked like a small prototype engine, sleek, compact, and humming softly with energy. Ethan had rebuilt it using the last surviving components of the original design. It wasn't meant to fly, but to prove a point, to show that truth can rise again, even from ashes. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just about invention anymore. It was about justice. He uploaded the data from the microchip into the terminal, connecting it to Aerolux's network. In less than an hour, the files would automatically transmit across multiple global news outlets and research servers, revealing the truth about Aerolux's foundation, the cover-up, and the deaths of those who were silenced. The countdown began. 60 minutes? He glanced at his daughter, his voice soft yet steady as he explained what the Phoenix truly stood for: not wealth, not fame, but rebirth. No matter how many times you fall, he whispered under his breath, you rise again. Outside, headlights pierced through the rain-soaked night. A car slowed to a stop near the broken gates. Alexander Grant stepped out, rain drenching his coat as he stared at the building that had haunted his family's name for decades. He walked slowly toward the faint light glowing inside, every step echoing with guilt. When he entered the main hall, the sight froze him in place. Ethan stood at the console, illuminated by blue light, the tattoo on his wrist glowing faintly as he adjusted the controls. The symbol of the Phoenix, wings wrapped in flame, seemed alive again. Alexander's voice trembled as he spoke into the vast emptiness, though Ethan didn't turn around. It was you, he murmured. You built everything. And we destroyed it. Ethan didn't respond. His silence was louder than words. For a long moment neither man moved. The rain beat against the cracked glass, thunder rolled outside, and the hum of the generator filled the space between them. Alexander finally stepped closer, seeing the files uploading on the terminal. The company's entire hidden history flashing across the screen. He realized what Ethan was doing, exposing it all. You'll bring the company down, he said quietly. Everything my father built. Ethan turned at last, his eyes calm but burning with truth. He looked at the young man before him and said, almost as if speaking to fate itself, then let it burn. Because it wasn't built, it was stolen. For the first time in his life, Alexander had no argument. No pride. Only shame. But before he could say another word, the facility lights flickered violently. The security grid had detected the intrusion. Dozens of red alarms began flashing across the terminal. Ethan's countdown, the upload of the files, had triggered a silent alert to Aerolux's private security team. They were coming. Alexander's earpiece crackled to life. His head of security shouted through the static. Sir, we've got a situation. Stand down and wait for extraction. But Alexander didn't move. He looked at Ethan, then at the girl sitting quietly in the corner, the daughter of the man his company had destroyed. Something inside him shifted. He knew this wasn't Ethan's war anymore. It was his. The CEO walked toward the console, ignoring the alarms. Finish it, he said. Let the truth out. I'll hold them off. Ethan stared at him for a long moment, the man who had once mocked him, now standing beside him. The world has a strange way of bringing enemies together when the truth demands it. Then, a blinding flash of headlights cut through the shattered doorway. Black SUVs screeched to a stop outside. Armed men stepped out, moving in formation. The storm had brought the past to their doorstep. Ethan grabbed his daughter's hand and turned back to the console. The upload bar reached 87%. 88%. 89%. The first gunshot shattered the silence. Glass exploded across the room. Alexander ducked behind a pillar, shouting for Ethan to go. But Ethan refused. He wasn't leaving again. Not this time. As the bullets tore through the walls, the upload reached 97%. The truth was seconds away from reaching the world. And then, the power went out. Darkness swallowed the entire facility. The screen went black. Ethan froze. The storm roared louder outside, wind howling like the ghosts of the past returning for one final reckoning. And in that darkness, one sound echoed, the metallic click of a gun being loaded behind him. The world fell into silence, a silence so heavy it seemed to crush the air itself. Darkness enveloped the entire Phoenix facility, swallowing every flicker of light, every trace of sound, leaving only the echo of the storm outside. Ethan Cole stood frozen beside the dead terminal, his heart pounding like a drum against the silence. His daughter clung to his arm, trembling but defiant. Somewhere beyond the blackness, footsteps creaked on the soaked floor. The intruders had arrived. A single beam of light cut through the dark, a flashlight sweeping across broken machinery and rusted walls. The security team moved with military precision, their voices cold, their orders sharper than the rain outside. Ethan's pulse raced. The upload was gone, or so it seemed. The power failure had stopped it at 97%. Years of sacrifice, every truth he had buried, every secret he had fought to protect, all of it teetered on the edge of vanishing forever. But then, something flickered. The old Phoenix terminal, the one connected to his wife's original blueprints, hummed faintly. Even without power, its small backup core still glowed with a heartbeat of light. Clara had built it that way, a failsafe, hidden in plain sight. Ethan's eyes widened. The upload wasn't gone. It was sleeping. He crouched beside the console, fingers trembling as he accessed the hidden drive. The tattoo on his wrist, the mark of the Phoenix, brushed against the biometric reader, and the screen blinked alive once more. Outside, the security forces were closing in. Inside, Ethan worked like a man possessed. And then, from the shadows, Alexander Grant appeared. Blood streaked across his forehead from a shattered glass panel, but his eyes burned with resolve. He had faced his father's legacy his entire life, the empire built on greed, lies, and silence. And now, standing in the same ruins that empire had destroyed, he had made his choice. He stepped forward, unarmed, and raised his voice against the thunder. "Finish it, Ethan." The team outside heard movement and began shouting orders. Bullets tore through the air again, spraying sparks across the wet floor. Ethan shielded his daughter, while Alexander grabbed a fallen metal beam and slammed it against the door to hold it shut. Every second felt like an eternity. The terminal screen glowed brighter. 98%. 99%. And then, with one final surge, 100%. The files transferred, not to a single server, but to hundreds, media outlets, scientific boards, whistleblower archives. The truth of Aerolux's crimes, the corruption, the stolen designs, and the silenced engineers, all of it was unleashed. The world would know. Ethan stared at the glowing confirmation message, tears welling in his eyes. Clara's dream, their dream, was finally free. But the victory came with a price. A burst of gunfire shattered the glass windows above. A bullet struck the terminal, sending sparks flying. The upload was safe, but the facility wasn't. Flames began spreading across the debris, licking at old fuel stains and broken circuits. The Phoenix facility was burning again. Alexander turned to Ethan, shouting through the chaos, his voice raw but unyielding. "Get your daughter out! Now!" Ethan hesitated. "What about you?" Alexander gave a faint smile, the kind that carried both regret and peace. "I have debts to pay." He rushed toward the advancing guards, unarmed but fearless, shouting at them to stand down, to stop shooting, to listen, but they didn't. They fired, their bullets ricocheting through the inferno. Ethan grabbed Lila and ran toward the emergency stairwell. Smoke filled the air, searing his lungs as flames consumed the building that had once been his sanctuary. Each step felt heavier than the last, as memories of Clara and the life they'd lost replayed in flashes. Behind him, explosions roared through the corridors. By the time Ethan and Lila stumbled outside, the entire sky glowed orange. Fire danced in the rain, consuming everything it touched. Sirens wailed in the distance, police, firefighters, media. The truth was spreading faster than the flames. He turned back toward the entrance, hoping, praying, that Alexander had made it out. But there was only fire, and the faint silhouette of a man standing inside, framed by light and smoke. And then, he was gone. The Phoenix had claimed its final sacrifice. Hours later, as dawn broke, news networks around the world erupted with shock. The leaked files had reached every major outlet. Headlines filled screens. Aerolux exposed, decades of corruption uncovered. Stolen blueprints, silenced scientists, the hidden truth behind the empire. Ethan Cole, the forgotten engineer who changed aviation. The world finally knew. Ethan watched the sunrise from a hill overlooking the smoking ruins. His daughter slept beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. He looked at her, the only piece of Clara he had left, and smiled faintly. In his pocket, he still carried the old phoenix emblem, charred, bent, and blackened, but unbroken. Later that day, the authorities arrived. They asked questions, they searched for answers, they tried to make sense of what had happened. But Ethan said very little. He didn't need to. The truth was already flying higher than any jet ever could. Weeks passed. Aerolux's board collapsed under global scrutiny. Investors fled. The military contracts were cancelled. The company was dismantled piece by piece, its stolen wealth redirected to the families of those who had been silenced. And in the ashes of its fall, something new began to rise. A new company, Phoenix Dynamics, launched quietly 6 months later. Its mission: to create affordable, sustainable aircraft for global relief and humanitarian work. Its founder remained anonymous. But those who had seen the tattoo on his wrist already knew. Ethan didn't return to the spotlight. He didn't give interviews or make statements. Instead, he worked quietly, rebuilding from the ground up, teaching Lila how to dream the way her mother once did. And sometimes, late at night, when the hangar lights dimmed and the hum of machinery filled the air, he would close his eyes and imagine Clara standing beside him again, smiling through the noise. He had lost everything once. But now, he understood, true legacy isn't about wealth or power. It's about what rises after the fire. And the phoenix had risen. And so, my friends, the world learned that even the smallest flame can burn down an empire of lies. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because you never know, the next story might be about you. Before you go, tell me in the comments, globe showing Europe Africa, if you had the power to expose one hidden truth in the world, what would it be?